So I'm going to talk just briefly about version 119, actually 119.1. There needed to be a very small fix after it was released. Share screen. I think I want that one. Well, does that look correct? So since the previous release, there were 617 commits, which is about 4.1 commits per day between release 118 and 119, which was up quite a lot since the previous release, which had 2.5 commits per day in its between releases. I don't know. I think they're just interesting stats. There was almost, 30-40% extra work done. I think that's actually definitely not my work. That's kind of contributions from the community, which is really good. So
I had a couple other points. There's 57 contributors this release.
This release?
Yeah.
50, yeah. I thought it was more than that.
Well, 58, but there's 2 using this.
Oh, yeah,
there's one user with 2 names. I've got some Git commands to pull this out too if you want to do it for each release. And the release note was 776 lines long, which I think is a record. Although the bug fix release 119.1, the release note was 6 lines long. So, I just thought that was interesting. And it was 5 months, almost pretty close to 5 months on the release schedule.
Yeah, it was, yeah, exactly, January to June. So yeah, that's the reason it took so long is because of the change to the bytecode, which there were lots of changes that went into that. Let me go to the top of this release note here. So the main thing was this new MPY format version 6. I have previously shown like some colored output of it and so on using the MPY tool. I won't do that now. But there were lots of little bits that, well, there was a big chunk of changes that changed the layout of the MPY file. And then there were other things that also required a change or that were a breaking change to the bytecode format that I wanted to get in at the same time, like the ability to do constants. So you can now do constant of anything really. So you can do like x equals const 1, 2, 3. We could always do this, but now you can do x equals const ABC, and it can also x is const a tuple of things. Remember dot 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 is actually a constant. Ellipsis. So you can do nested things. So a tuple of true, false, none are all constants. 1.2 is a constant. So this will allow you to make more efficient use of constants in your code. If you've got like some data that you need that's constant data, for example, a list of numbers that are calibration values for some sensor, if they're constants, don't use a list, because that can't be made a constant. If I try that, 1, 2, it'll tell me it's not a constant. Use a tuple because that's a constant, and then that can be optimized away by the compiler now, and also in the MPY file stored as the actual object rather than as bytecode that constructs that object. The other improvements were, well, jump offsets were changed to one byte. They used to be always just 2 bytes, but most jump offsets are very small, like you're only jumping 10 bytes in the bytecode or something. So you only need a 1 byte to store that. And so the jump offsets were optimized to take up only 1 byte where possible, or 2 if needed. So they're variable length encoded. And that really helped reduce the size of bytecode. Basically, you save 1 byte for every sort of jump, which is say every if statement or while loop or something. But if statements might have 2 or 3, depending on how complicated they are. So there was a decent improvement there. And all these things added up to, changing the bytecode, and it took a while to make all these changes and and get them in and settled and correct. So the MPY files are about 10% smaller now, which also means your bytecode and your RAM usage is less by about that same amount, maybe 5%. Yeah, that's what it says here. So I think that's really good. And also, as I've talked about before, these new MPY files are static data, so they can be memory mapped and used in place. That feature is not yet utilized, but in the future, we'll be able to construct static file systems of MPY files that can be executed without importing them into RAM. The other thing that required a change to the bytecode, I think, yes, it did, was support for multiple star arguments. So the way that works is you can now, before you could do print, say 1, 2, 3, but now you can also add a tuple. You can have as many as you like. And they're expanded into one set of positional arguments. And then similarly with keyword arguments, although I don't know if I have a very good example. Yeah, no, that's not hard, but you can also use multiple keyword arguments to a function. So if I do f of star A and star B, it's not a syntax error. It's just a name hasn't found error. But prior, that was a syntax error in Micropython. So that's a nice feature, a good addition. That was, I think, most of the changes to the MPY format. The other thing which I had mentioned, the implementation of sys.ps1, ps2, which you can see here. So I have a blue prompt, which is D2 because it's a POB D2 board. So I name all my boards differently. So I know what board I'm running on. So all you have to do is just set sys.ps1. It's just some string here, which changes the color and the text. The other thing here, so ideally we're going to deprecate os.uname because it's a little bit sort of awkward the way it works. Node name doesn't really make sense, and it's not really matching CPython so well. So what's changed now is with sys, we're using sys.version, sys.implementation. So sys.version now has the Micropython version appended, which you see in the banner. So literally the string in the banner, the first part of the string in the banner is appended to the sys.version. And then the second part of the banner is _machine in implementation. So this is compatible with CPython because you're allowed to add things with an underscore in sys.implementation. So most of your information about the build is now in these two variables, sys.version and sys.implementation. And it's giving the same information as what was in os.uname, but os.uname is just not, it's not there on Windows, and well, there are reasons which sys will be a bit better. Platform as well, we have now, which gives you a bit more information about the architecture and what the underlying HAL is and the new lib and so on. Also, I think we can get compiler out of this GCC 11. So that's useful sometimes to know what compiler you compiled something in, because some compilers can have errors when others don't. Platform is not available everywhere, but sys.version and implementation will be. So when you're posting bug reports, it's good to put the output of sys.version and sys.implementation. And platform.platform if it exists, especially on ESP32, it will tell you the IDF version, which is very, very useful. The other thing, I didn't write it there. So in the REPL, it now supports pasting without going into raw mode. So I have this text down here. Normally I'd go into raw mode with Control E, and then I can paste, and then Control D will execute. So here it's taking this second branch and printing the one. And before, if you try and paste that at the REPL, all the indentation would go awry because of auto indentation. But now if I paste that, it actually pastes correctly without the indentation going funny. And notice there's a difference when I execute here. The one is printed out, whereas before it wasn't. So remember, when you execute things at the REPL, the result of all expressions is always printed. This is standard behavior in CPython, but sometimes can confuse. If there's none is the result, it doesn't print none. It only prints things that are non-none. So the way this works is that if auto indent is active, so here auto indent is active, but if I press space, it jumps back and lets me insert my and then disables auto indent. So if you press a space at the beginning of a line in auto indent mode, it disables auto indent and undoes what it did. I think, yeah, this should hopefully help. There was a bug report about, well, someone raised an issue about this. I think it's actually quite good that you can now paste normal code at the REPL without using paste mode. Paste mode's still there, and obviously is also useful because you can't define multiple functions. If I do at the if I do this will work, but only it's actually executed 2 statements here, one and then another one. And if I join it together, it doesn't work because this thing here it's not one statement, it's 2 joined together, which is wrong. Python doesn't like that. But in raw paste mode, that works. Oops, I've got to paste the right thing. In raw paste mode, you're allowed to have as many statements as you want. So F is now defined. Anyway, you can play with that. Some other things, MPY Cross now supports V6M, which is for RP2040 for Raspberry Pi. So that's a very, I think, a good addition. We can now have native code in MPY files, which work on a RP2 board. LilFS was updated to 2.5.0, and that got it a little bit more performance. Oh yeah, this is what I was talking about, the REPL. MP Remote's had a few.
That LilFS improvement, that's actually pretty significant for certain scenarios. So like that's been a really big difference for some of our projects at work. Like 100 times faster in some regards, in some measurements.
Yep.
It's really cool.
That's good. It's still, there are still things to tune. I think it, as I mentioned, we might be good to double or quadruple the default buffer size for the LFS, but
yep,
do that at some point. Yeah, so MP Remote has a version now. So if I MP Remote -- version, yep, MP Remote. Well, help has been there, but now it's available as -- help as well. So resume and yeah, soft reset. There's a few extra commands you can do to resume a session, so it doesn't automatically reset the board when you start it. ESP32, yeah, there's been some new boards there and some changes that you can read about. NRF has had features enabled on bigger boards. Mostly thanks to Andrew there. And async IO is included in the build. Another highlight of the release was the new Renesas port, or Renesas RA port. And that has, I think, 5 or 6 boards available. That's been a really good contribution by Renesas themselves, and it looks like they'll continue to support that, which is good. So it's got some basic support. Yeah, you can see pin, ADC, I2C, SPI, UART and timer, RTC. So, oh, and yeah, internal flash file system, which is, so it's you know, useful for a lot of things there already. So hopefully that gets some more features in the future. Probably USB would be a good one to get there, because I think they do support USB on those parts. The RP2 port has optional mass storage support, which you can have to enable in a build option. And then Andrew has contributed a WISNet driver for that, which is really awesome to get Ethernet support. So that required integrating LWIP for TCP/IP and sockets, which was most of the work, I think, or at least 50% of the work. So yeah, that's really cool. RP2 did already have Wi-Fi support, but that was done in a different way, not with LWIP. So kind of subtle differences whether or not you run the TCP/IP stack on or off the RP2040 itself. So with the WISNet, you're running that TCP/IP stack on the RP2040, although there is also an option to run it on the WISNet. But you get better support for like async IO if you run it on the chip itself. In STM32 land, we had 3 new microcontroller supported: G0, G4, and WL series. WL is supposed to be LoRa, and there's some work going on with LoRa drivers, which will be available soon. G0 and G4 are sort of, yeah, just new microcontrollers. That G4 is lower end and G4 is higher end. They work well. Have a lot of, basically all the features that we have in STM32 are supported on those. The Arduino Portento H7 is now supported in Micropython, which has Wi-Fi and Bluetooth. Very similar to a Piboard D, uses very similar parts.
How is the Wi-Fi chip connected to the main chip in that regard? Is it SPI or?
No, it's the same as the Piboard D. It's a SDIO.
Okay.
It's a yeah, like a 4-wire SDIO bus. Yeah, so it's this. I have one here, but it's oh, I've got this box is not opened or resealed. Anyway, so that's good. There were some quite a few breaking changes to PIB.can. You'll need to update if your code. Unfortunately, it's not backwards compatible. It's not too hard. There's a commit here referenced. You can see how to update things. And it's done so that we can support FD-CAN on the H7 and other parts that support it. But also, you can now have mixed classic and extended ID nodes on the one bus. So previously with the CAN class, you had to configure it to be either classic IDs or extended IDs, and you couldn't have both. So that's a bit restrictive. But now it's possible in each send and receive to say whether or not you're talking to a node that has a classic ID or an extended ID. So that's, yeah, that's really, I think, a good change. So hopefully code's not too hard to update, but you can see there's documentation and everything to follow there. Unix port was sort of made to match bare metal a lot closer. So it enabled the VFS subsystem for everything, which I guess the VFS subsystem is the virtual file system, is an integral part now of MP Remote and, well, really everything. It's been used for a long time on bare metal, and Unix now uses it by default as well. So on the Unix port, you can mount virtual file systems as well as the host's file system, which yeah, it's a very, very cool feature. Windows also has VFS now. It's very close to Unix port in functionality. Zephyr was upgraded to version 3. Here I've listed the code size change, which is mostly an increase for most ports. I think it's useful to see this going from version to version because it tells a good story as to what actually changed in the firmware. So bare arm is supposed to be, you know, just the basic interpreter and runtime and compiler. And if that increases, then, so, you know, there are some very significant internal things going on here. And that really is down to the bytecode, the reworked bytecode, and optimized jump offsets and things like this. And support for star arguments, multiple star arguments. Unix has increased a lot because of the VFS, the virtual file system that was been enabled there. STM32, you can see, didn't increase by much, and that's because the optimizations to the bytecode actually reduced the frozen code by a lot, which counteracted the increase that you see up here of approximately 800 bytes. So that's nice to see. And on big projects that use a lot of frozen bytecode, they're significantly smaller now in this version because of the new bytecode format is, you know, 5 to 10% smaller. Yes, so things like the NRF port got new features enabled, so that's where that increased, and RP 2040 that had crypto lib enabled, so that has embed TLS now built in, so that's why that increased so much. SAMD, that was also bytecode change. So I think, yeah, as I've said, it's a good summary of what's happened in this release. And yeah, here is listed all the people who've contributed. Thank you very much. I'm sure we'll see some of you, most of you in the next release, and other people. You can read, yeah, below the fold here is much more detailed, but I've tried to give a high level overview of what's happened in these notes here. That's it, thank you. I see there's a question from Andy about customization breaking Tony, but I don't know if I can answer that now.
I was going to ask the same question, yeah. Okay. I think their problem was just they were looking for the standard shell character, and when you can change it, it breaks.
That's what he said. I just wanted to make sure everybody knew about it because Thonny seems to be one of the more popular, at least beginner IDEs for folks.
Yeah, I see. I mean, we did have to change MP remote so that it could detect a new prompt. Maybe there can be some restriction where you've got to change to a prompt that has at least one greater than symbol and a space at the end of it, and then Thonny can just look for that. Or Thonny could inspect sys.ps1 and then use that. That might be a good way to do it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't know what his plan is at the moment. I might ping him and see if he needs any ideas.
Yeah, that would be helpful. So regarding your other point, oh yes, GitHub templates, that would be a good idea. Your os.u name is not yet deprecated. It contains the same information, but the idea is to eventually deprecate that. So when we do that, we can update. I mean, it's probably a good idea to update those templates already. Yep. Stop sharing.
I also had a brief wondering when that all came up. Like the sys.pt version, is there a strong reason to keep it reporting 3.4? Is that really the most compatible version?
That would be good to update to 3.5. Now that we have support for multiple star arguments, I think we can go to 3.5 and maybe 3.6 if we've got, I mean, we're never going to get 100% compatibility. Like we don't have 100% compatibility of 3.4, but yeah, we've got a lot of things have been added to get to 3.5 feature level and probably even 3.6 with F strings and so on. So probably we can have a discussion about what that can be moved to and what the criteria are.
Most compatible level sort of thing. It came up for me briefly this morning playing with this debug stuff because some of those scripts say, oh, you're under 3.6. No, when you're not going to work at all. Like that's using a deprecated version of Python kind of thing. So
okay.
Just because anything under 3.6 is very much deprecated. So look, not many times you're really going to be using off-the-shelf C Python stuff that's going to throw out that kind of declaration. But yeah, it made me think about that version that we report and what that means.
Interesting. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, what 3.4 meant was that that's when Micropython started.
Yeah.
That's what this version of CPython was we started with. And it hasn't increased since then. But yeah.
Yeah, I get what you mean. It's hard to make a call of what you should call it. But what would be a driver for changing it at all?
Well, now that we have this CPython difference table, if we look at the 3.5 table, everything's either partial, completed, or not relevant. Or there's one in progress, type hints, but that's not important. The only one's PEP 489, redesigning extension model loading. What's that? Probably we can ignore that one. So it's probably, I would say we could go to 3.5 without much hassle now that the unpacking generalizations are done.
Yeah.
3.6, I see there's no status on anything there. But actually underscores and litany records we support, asynchronous generators we don't, variable annotation syntax we do. So you're right, Matt, we do need to update that.
Yeah, I've got a task to try to update that. So it's, I think we've got a lot more data in the in the various issues that we've got. So just need to update the docs.
Literal string formatting. So I think 3.5 definitely, 3.6 we're probably close to calling it that, or 3.6 minus a few features.
Yeah, I reckon.
Right. I saw and I heard you talking about or at least mention the bug report template that Andy had talked about, but from what I can tell, no one used, they just deleted it.
we made a small fix to that yesterday because the first line on the template was delete everything below.
Yeah.
So people probably just deleting everything below and not even reading it. But we moved that line to the bottom. So the bottom line is now delete everything above. And hopefully they read that stuff first.
But even as a reminder prompt, it's still worth doing. But yeah.